Just Paul with you. It is 14 minutes, check that, 13 minutes away from noon, and I'm joined live in the studio. It is McLaughlin, right?
Yes,
not McLaughlin.
Right.
Not that yet. By Gayle McLaughlin, who is running for Lieutenant Governor. So much to talk about. Let's start with the small talk. You had a nice drive up from Eureka today?
Oh, yes. It was just beautiful. I mean, just some rain going down and seeing the lush greenness, just really beautiful. And the ocean. I mean, I was just awestruck by it all.
I am always struck by what we can do with the color green up here.
Oh,
it's very
really?
nice.
Really? It's amazing.
So you are traveling around the state in your campaign, your candidate for Lieutenant Governor. Let me first off, this is the first question. Of all the offices to pick, you have time on the city council and as mayor of Richmond, California.
Right.
Why Lieutenant Governor?
Well, I think there's a lot that can be done with the Lieutenant Governor position. Now, I am the former mayor of Richmond, and, I ran 2 terms as mayor. You could only run 2 terms, so I termed out, so that's 8 years. And then I ran, first I had 2 years as a council member, then later I had, after I termed out, I ran for council again. So altogether, 12 and a half years in elected office in Richmond, which is a city across the bay from San Francisco. And I made the office of mayor into something it had never been before. I used the position as an opportunity to mobilize the community and, work side by side with community leaders in terms of pressuring the other members of the council to get some really amazing things done. And I think I can do the same with the lieutenant governor position, although there are some seats that the lieutenant governor sits on that I think can be used really for bringing forward the voice of the people as well, but also through a elected body or a body that an elected official sits on. I do want to share a little bit, if it's okay, with some of the successes that we've had in Richmond.
I'm sorry to let me just break in.
Go
I've
ahead.
lived in the Bay Area for about 15 years. Richmond, I know Richmond. Richmond is like no other city in the Bay Area, too.
That's true. That's true.
And very industrial still to this day. You have one entity in the town, which is what? Chevron has been there for 100 years now?
100 plus years.
So they're kind of ensconced. You have to deal with a lot of things there.
We do have to deal with them.
What are some of the issues, some of the problems that you addressed in Richmond?
Okay, perfect question here. So what we did in Richmond back in 2003, and I'm a co-founder of this alliance, we built an organization called the Richmond Progressive Alliance, the RPA. And we did that as a way to overcome what was missing in Richmond at the time. The city council in 2003 and previous city councils were all under the thumb of Chevron. They were either purchased by Chevron or they were intimidated by the oil giant. And so it was very clear that, democracy in Richmond was not healthy at all. And so we decided we had to take things into our own hands. We were activists from, on many different issues, some trying to hold Chevron accountable, some working on homeless issues, some on reduction of crime, because Richmond had a lot of crime at that time as well. And we decided to come together, and regardless of party affiliation, some of us were Green Party members, some were Progressive Democrats, some had no party affiliation, and we came together to form this organization based on our values, our progressive values, and to really build and transform our city, and also to run local candidates for local office. That was the missing piece, to get people in office, and we ran candidates without any corporate money. So that is unique to the RPA model, and we had great successes. I won the first race I ran, and subsequently four races altogether without a penny of corporate money.
Wow.
And I'm not the only one. Today, as of this past November, or I should say a year ago this month, in 2016 November, when the whole country, was reeling from the election of Trump and such, in Richmond we elected 2 more corporate-free council members, so that now we have 5 corporate-free council members out of 7 sitting on the city council. That's a super majority. And that came about, over a little more than a decade. But it can be done. You could win by making these relationships with the community and letting them know that, Chevron doesn't have a monopoly on our city. We want sustainable businesses. We want to reduce crime. And we were able to do so many of these things over the past decade.
I've got a question about campaigning without corporate money.
Sure.
What takes the place then?
What takes the place is a lot of door-to-door, building relationships, making use of the money that we do have in a very efficient way. And we often run in slates. Like, for example, in 2014 was my last year as mayor. I was terming out, and I decided I would run for city council to keep the work going. I wanted to keep the transformation of Richmond going. And I was running with two other progressives of the RPA. So we're Team Richmond, we called ourselves, and we were against Team Chevron because Chevron had its candidates. And Bernie Sanders came to Richmond in 2014, and he endorsed me and my two colleagues in the RPA. And he said to us, if the RPA can beat Chevron in all its millions, because Chevron spent $3.5 million to try and defeat us in 2014.
Wow.
That's in a city of 110,000.
Yeah.
It's not a huge city. And they spent that much. They just wanted to keep us back. But Bernie said, if you can defeat Chevron and its millions, you'll give hope to communities and cities everywhere.
Wow.
And sure enough, that's what we did. We beat all the Chevron candidates. We all won, all three of the Team Richmond group, and all of the Chevron candidates lost. So it didn't happen overnight, that consciousness raising of the community. It happened over a course of decades, or I should say a little over one decade, but it can happen. And directly to your question, it takes that hard work, organizing, building community activities. When I was mayor, I had all kinds of community meetings and been out there standing. We have 40% of our community is Latino, standing for our diversity. We have a strong African American community, and really making it clear that we had to address the root causes of our problems.
What were those root causes that you addressed in that decade?
Yeah, so poverty, and I know you have poverty here in Del Norte and in Crescent City. It's really nationwide a problem, this growing wealth inequality, income inequality. And in Richmond, we had that big time, and a lot of it erupted on our city streets in violence, because when there's no opportunity and there's not enough job training, etc., and education, oftentimes youth will get in a state of desperation and pick up a gun and do something unthinkable. So that's what was happening in Richmond. So we took a different approach than previous elected officials, and we said, it's not more and more police that are going to solve this. Yes, we need good police. We need community involved policing, which we were able to get a good police chief on board who shifted the culture of the police department. But we also had to offer those opportunities. So we had an Office of Neighborhood Safety that I put in place when I was mayor. I put to the city council, and after some tangling and tussling with my colleagues, we got it approved, which put outreach teams into neighborhoods hardest hit by crime. And these outreach teams were made up of formerly incarcerated individuals who had turned their lives around. Wow. And they were able to reach out to the youth and direct them, into mentoring services or job training, education services, and it made a lot of difference. But we also did things like reform renovated our parks and our community centers, offered recreation and all kinds of art and creative activities for youth, really engaged youth. And finally, many other activities that really captured missing links to the root causes of our crime, giving these opportunities which were missing before. But we also raised the minimum wage. In Richmond, the minimum wage is going up to $15 an hour next year.
Wow.
So the state minimum wage will not go up to $15 an hour until 2022. So, you have to move forward faster. And so we knew our community needed it, so we approved this incremental increase, and in January it goes up to I think it's $13.41. Now it's $12.60. By the end of next year it goes up to $15.
Now the big criticism as far as raising the minimum wage is that you're going to stifle industry or business or employment because of that. Have you found that to be the case?
Well, we really researched this with economists and scholars from UC Berkeley, and they said it will not discourage business as long as it's done incrementally, and you could go up to, I think it's 10 to 15% each year, bring that wage up that amount. So we followed that, and it has not in any way. I mean, this went into effect a couple years ago. We actually raised it higher recently, and it has not discouraged business at all. We find that, if anything, Richmond is becoming a better place to live. People have, we encourage people to move to Richmond and work in Richmond, and I think that is definitely happening.
That's wonderful. I mean, when I lived in the Bay Area, it was the 90s, and Richmond was a scary place, and you stayed away from Richmond.
Right.
And just recently went down taking my daughter around to universities in the Bay Area, and we stayed up in Vallejo, and I drove through Richmond every day. It's a different place now.
It really is.
It really is. And I didn't know if I was imagining that or not.
Well, we reduced homicides 75%.
Wow.
Over the 8 years I was mayor. In 2007, when I first took the seat as mayor, we had 47 homicides that year. The last year I was mayor, we had 11. Now, still 11 too many, but 11 is a 75% reduction.
That's remarkable.
That's a big thing because, of course, violence reduction and public safety is on the minds of people all the time. People want safe neighborhoods, and so we really worked hard on that. But we also know that other issues are important to low-income communities, like the housing crisis.
Tell me about that. You as mayor, stood up to the banks. You were talking about eminent domain and dealing with the housing crisis.
Right.
I read on your Wikipedia page about that, but it didn't have how it came out.
Right. Okay. I could share that.
So if you could share that struggle.
Yeah. So in the midst of the foreclosure crisis, Richmond was hit hard. We're a majority people of color community, so. The whole subprime mortgage crisis was something that affected people of color in a major way. The big banks targeted people of color often for these bad, toxic mortgages. And so we really suffered hard from the foreclosure crisis. And many, in fact, at one point, Richmond mortgages half of the mortgages in the city were underwater.
That's what I'd read, yeah.
Right. So what we did was we decided we had to do something really out of the box and bold. So we put forward this program and championed it. It was called the Richmond Cares program, but many people call it the Eminent Domain program. What we were seeking to do was to acquire more, first of all, asking the big banks and the hedge funds and whatever to reduce the principal on the mortgages, modify these mortgages for our homeowners so that these mortgages were in line with the home's value at the time, which was way lower than the mortgages. And they were refusing. And they said, we can't do it. We have investors all over the world, can't bring them together. We don't have the ability. So we said, fine. Well, sell them to us. And if you won't sell them to us, we'll acquire them by eminent domain. And we're talking about acquiring the mortgages, not the homes.
And the lot, really, not the home.
Yes,
Okay,
the homeowner stays in the home.
Exactly.
And we would acquire these underwater mortgages, and then the city would reduce the principal and put them back in the hands of the homeowner who never moves at all, and then they have those affordable mortgage payments.
What I appreciated was the logic behind the push for the eminent domain was that if you kick these people out, you evict these people out, you've got an empty house here. This is blight, and in this community, and that's an issue in our community. Just blighted properties that just sit for years and decay.
Wow.
And that seemed like, well, then this is here's a corporate interest who's doing something that's going to really harm your community, and of course you're going to stand up for that.
That's right.
So I appreciate that logic. It sort of applies with what we have going on here.
Oh, yes, and it's really something that would have helped, and I'll share with you what happened.
Okay.
But the On the blight issue, yes. The reason we sought to utilize eminent domain, which any government could use if there is a public purpose. And the public purpose in acquiring these mortgages is to prevent blight, because when you have blight, you have more crime. I mean, first of all, our desire was to help our homeowners, but we also wanted stable neighborhoods. We wanted crime-free neighborhoods, and we didn't want dumping all around, which happens when you have these vacant homes. So, what we did was, really champion this program, and it got nationwide attention. I mean, the MSNBC, CNBC, CNN. We were really capturing the attention of some of these big establishment media, and Wall Street didn't like it.
Nope.
So they came back, and we were trying to get other cities to join us, and they first of all, they went to Richmond and tried to get some of my colleagues to back away from this, and they went to other cities, said don't follow Richmond's lead, and eventually they went to Congress, and they got Congress to pass a bill, which Obama signed at the end of 2014, that said any entity, any public entity, any municipality that acquires a mortgage by eminent domain will not get government insurance.
Wow.
So we were going to use federal housing agency insurance, and that's often what how mortgages are insured, and that left us in a bad way. However, we had made such a big stink and such a publicity about this that some of the big banks felt the pressure, and they voluntarily modified mortgages for more of our homeowners than they would have, not nearly enough.
So, and they didn't sell the mortgage, but they just voluntarily modified it.
They just did it themselves. So we think we had some effect, not as much as we had wanted. And who knows, maybe in the future, with a different Congress, we could resurrect that program.
How was the housing crisis played out in Richmond?
So the housing crisis in the Bay Area is just outrageous. Gentrification in San Francisco moved to gentrification in Oakland, and it was coming to Richmond. And we wanted to preserve our longtime homeowners, our longtime renters. And one thing we did to slow down gentrification was that we passed this past November the first new rent control and just cause for eviction law in California in 30 years.
Oh, wow.
So that was another, really bold thing. We organized the community, built a coalition, and I was a proponent of the rent control just cause measure, and it passed overwhelmingly because people understand it. But you do have to.
People in the Bay Area understand rent control.
They
yes.
do. They do. And
They
even though we had the apartment association spending lots of money against us, we reached out to people, said don't listen to them. Here's the truth, and so it did pass. So those are some of the ways we help with that economic inequity. But we also got $114 million in additional taxes from Chevron, again through community pressure and those of us on the council who support the community working hard.
Was this with the Proposition 13 loopholes, or was this just specifically to Richmond?
This was specifically to Richmond. We passed a measure called Measure T. It was a large manufacturer's tax that would have impacted Chevron and Chevron alone. I mean, not Chevron to the greatest extent.
Sure.
It would have affected some other large manufacturers. But they went to the courts after the public passed it, and Chevron won, and sadly. But we were going forward with a new tax measure, correcting some of the legal issues that the judge said were present in that measure, even though we had a lawyer review it to begin with. But so Chevron knew that we could win again, so they came to the table and negotiated this $114 million settlement.
Wow.
So that was a big success.
Was it a one-time settlement, or is it actually taxes restructured?
It's over 15 years.
Okay.
So, it's about $7.5 million a year on average, but it was a little front-loaded more, at the beginning years, and goes down a little. But, it's a start. It's not the level of fair taxation that we think, because we know corporations get away with murder. You mentioned Prop 13 with that corporate loophole. So,
Okay, so that's wonderful. You've cut your teeth. You've done all these things. Richmond, that's passed. You are here campaigning for lieutenant governorship.
Right.
How are you going? How do you plan to take your and Joy? I'll get to these questions. How are you planning to take take what you learned as city council and mayor of Richmond to the state level?
Great question. Thank you, Paul. So we think that the RPA model, this model of running corporate-free candidates for local office, for school board, for city council, is a successful model. We have that track record. So I'm going around, my campaign is going around up and down the state of California, encouraging other communities to build these progressive alliances and to build that local movement and work on transforming and bettering people's lives. That's what it comes down to. And we have seen about 7 new progressive alliances around the state form in the last 4 or 5 months, like San Diego Progressive Alliance. There's a South Bay LA People's Alliance, they call themselves. There's a South Bay in the San Jose area Progressive Alliance. There's a North Coast People's Alliance. So these are, they took some of the RPA knowledge and model. We did a video on how we did it, and we encourage that. And that's what my campaign is doing. It's essentially an organizing campaign, encouraging this local power building to transform lives. And then, if I get elected and I am running to win, the idea is to network together. I mean, even through the campaign, we're networking these progressive alliances and all the Our Revolution groups that Bernie Sanders set into motion. I already have 20 Our Revolution groups in California's endorsement. So nice. To really bring these forces together to build statewide power. And then we can impact the state issues that we need to. So I'm championing those state issues as well, but we need to do it from the bottom up with these grassroots progressive alliances.
That's it. That's really, really interesting. So, I mean, you've got to be leery about, not just Republican, such as it is in California, but it can be big. And, of course, there's the whole Southern California, I hear, down there somewhere. Right. But then also you've got to be worried about Democratic money coming at you, right? And the Democratic Party, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, I think you mentioned something about why did I choose the lieutenant governor campaign. And I was mentioning I think I can make it into what it hasn't been before. But I think also it's one of those positions that the Democrats aren't going to be putting as much money into. Like the governor race, they'll probably be trying to get their corporate Democrat.
Do you think you can sneak in because it's not
I'm hoping. I think it would not just sneak. I mean, yes.
Well, I don't mean
yeah. But
exactly.
I mean, I think there'll be less, hopefully it'll be more of an opportunity to win if we do the groundwork. And so we're doing the groundwork, and like I said, I think there's more opportunities with that position because you don't have quite as much responsibility as the governor, for example, so I can use it for this grassroots organizing. So that's my desire and my hope. And it's so far people are rising up and embracing the ideas, and of course the statewide issues. We have to organize around them as well, like single payer health care for all, free college. I'm also proposing to close the corporate loophole of Prop 13, which will bring in $9 billion more a year to our state. We could get our schools up to where they should be. Also talking about a progressive millionaire's tax. So each million that someone brings in, that they would go up to a higher tax bracket. And an oil severance tax. And banning fracking. First we have to ban fracking, but then with the wells that continue, we don't want any new extraction wells, but those that are operating, we should get some tax money out of that, and each year raise the tax rate as a disincentive for them to keep extracting.
On the other side, do you plan to incentivize then alternative forms of energy production?
Absolutely. I believe that any tax money that we get from this severance tax should go to improving renewables. We could solarize the whole state. But I've been in Southern California a little bit, and some of the people around some of these extraction wells are saying that they have been impacted. So maybe some of the money should go to helping communities that are impacted. But ultimately, we have to get away from fossil fuels entirely. So I think a goal of being totally renewable in California by 2030 makes sense. So that means a lot of work in incentivizing renewables is absolutely the way to go.
So there are a lot of local issues here, and I know it's a big state, and you have How long have you been out campaigning?
Oh, I officially started in July, or I think the end of June. But we were already giving presentations about the RPA model even before I declared. And that's kind of what led to it. Hey, we're already giving presentations. Maybe if I took on a statewide race, we'd have a larger stage and a louder megaphone, and the press, like yourself, would want to interview me, and I could share the message, and it could go a little further.
You're very kind. I'd feel more like a larger entity if it were warmer in this house.
Okay.
So up here we were talking about local things. There are a lot of local issues from the Klamath dams, of course, and the removal, which is in a crazy sort of state of limbo right now. I don't know if you've been able to dig into that issue at all.
Yeah, a little bit. Joy did mention this to me, and I saw the Klamath River on the way here and such. And my husband looked at it, and we talked about it a little bit. And like I said, I did a little research. From what I can tell, and I'm sure there's more experts out in the community here, but it sounds like they're having to do an environmental impact review, and it won't. The closure of the dams won't happen until 2019, is what I read. But I think it's so important for the community to stay on top of this and keep advocating and play a watchdog role, because it's, things could go awry and they could come up with reasons why it won't be done, So, and it sounds like it's so very important to protect, the fishing industry and to protect, the salmon.
And native rights. It's depressing.
Native rights, yes.
It's depressing, too, when the Klamath is, when all the fish die in the Klamath. It's really a depressing scene. Some of these issues up here, and we were talking about as you were driving up, you came across Last Chance Grade. We've got environmental issues. There's overarching all of this is this larger sense of disconnect, and I mentioned this before, between Del Norte and what happens to the under 30,000 people who live in this little county up here, and Sacramento, and that can happen big and small. Cases in point, Last Chance Grade, $1 billion or so to replace, depending on which version you want to take, and it is a clear and present danger for everybody in this community and in this county, and then for commerce up and down Highway 101. Right. That's the big issue about there's a feeling like the state and also the federal government, but specifically the state, really isn't progressing with any sort of amount of urgency, because it's almost felt like there aren't enough people up here or enough money up here to sort of get the attention. Right down to, in a very small thing, this is at the opposite end of the spectrum. We have, of all the natural wonders we have here, one of my favorites is Lake Earl, which is a tidal lagoon, which is beautiful and pristine and off the map, and nobody really knows about it, and it's right here just basically outside of town, and it's a wonderful place to go for a walk. The state has decided they're going to start charging for using this wildlife reserve. And so it's like, $5 a time to go out there. Yeah. And they decided that without any sort of input from anybody in Del Norte County. So there is this feeling, here is this county that has 80% of its property off the tax rolls because it's park, it's protected, it's away. We are poor, we're hemmed in, and nobody is listening to us. And that is it's kind of a countywide assumption, and goes back decades. And so what can you do? And with the RPA sort of model that you work with, what can you do to change that? Yeah.
Well, first of all, as Lieutenant Governor, I would be sitting on the Coastal Commission.
Exactly.
So that offers an opportunity both to use the microphone of sitting on that body, but also to help the community come together and put forward I could bring items to that body and have the community speak about the issues of concern to Crescent City. What you describe is sort of like Del Norte is like a stepchild or something.
It feels that way a lot of the time.
That's got to change. It's such a beautiful, beautiful place. And I know it has its share of problems. You mentioned the poverty, but the environmental problems, I know there was the tsunami issue in 2011, and that needs to be rebuilt, and all the dollars that takes, and it's not coming forth. What I have done a further little bit of research on is that California puts out more money in taxes to the federal government than it gets back in resources and services. So, I mean, it's something like, there was a study, I think, a few years back that said 78 cents is what California gets back to every dollar in taxes that we give to the federal government. That's not fair. I mean, we have the need. We have the need for, building up our community to a level of healthy lifestyle and opportunity, but also to protect our environment. California has some of the most beautiful environment, and up here it is just exquisite, and it needs to be protected. And whatever funding needs to be acquired to keep it preserved and keep it the ecological balance that is needed, I would champion. I will. I mean, at this point, I come from. I used to be a Green Party member, and now I'm.
We didn't even mention that. You were the first mayor of any city of any size.
Right.
Was it in the state or the nation?
In the nation. Richmond was the largest city in the nation that had a Green Party mayor. So they used to call me the Green Mayor, and I embraced that and love the green values of the Green Party. I switched to no party preference to vote for Bernie Sanders in the primary, because you could vote on the Democratic ticket, and I've stayed NPP, and that's how I'm running as lieutenant governor. I think it's a way to bring people together from whatever party, but to bring progressives together mostly. But I want to share, in terms of the environmental issue, the importance of preserving our environment. We did that in Richmond in spite of the fact that we had this big oil refinery. We did limit their pollution and kept pushing back on them. We're suing them in court right now for major problems, a big fire in 2012. So we really pushed back, but we also protected the environment. We protected our north shoreline. We protected a beautiful peninsula called Point Melati. And so it comes through that RPA model, that building of community power together. And that is what I see I can help in regard to being lieutenant governor, being a candidate right now, and working with all your wonderful activists in Crescent City and Del Norte. Just bringing that synergy together, and I would use my voice as a voice of the community to champion these issues that you talk about, that you have so
And that all starts tonight at 6 o'clock, right?
Absolutely.
At 625 2nd Street. Is that just a home?
No.
I don't mean to say, it's something. I know that address. What is it? The Sun House?
Universal?
Yes, the Hearts Universe. That's right. I know where that is then. 625. And what is the name? I'll have to look that up. I'll get that out before I go off the air. It's the Universal. Oh, my God. The what? The Universal Heart Center. That's right. And by the Sun House, it's right there. I don't mean to keep popping these questions at you. Sorry. It's a pop quiz. You didn't expect. Yeah, I know. Now we're going to blindfold you and see if you can walk there. That's what we're going to do next. So tonight at 625 2nd Street, it's hosted by the New Progressives of Del Norte, and you can meet Gayle McLaughlin in person and shake her hand and talk to her. And it's happening from 6 to 7, correct? Yes. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we close?
Just that, these are times of struggle and organizing. I mean, the fact that we got this horrible person in the White House in some ways has activated people. I mean, it's a horror that we didn't want, but it had a silver lining, and people are getting more active. And I think it's ripe. The times are ripe for organizing. Organizing is hard work. We did it in Richmond, and if we could do it in Richmond and make so many successes with this big oil refinery, it could be done anywhere. So I say, yes, the times are times of struggle, but the future is ours. And that's the comment I just want to end on, because we all have to keep our eyes on that. And, our lives, our children's lives, our grandchildren's lives will be so much better because of it.
Gayle, it's been wonderful talking to you today. Thank you for stopping in. And do you have any plans for the day? How are you going to spend your day before the
I think we're gonna go out to lunch with Joy. She invited us out to lunch, and so we'll enjoy a wonderful meal, I'm sure, here in Crescent City.
Good. I know you'll be talking to people and seeing what we have to offer up here. and that's fantastic. If you'd like to meet Gayle in person, you can do so tonight between 6 and 7 at 625 2nd Street, right downtown, just a stone's throw from the harbor there. Gayle McLaughlin, candidate, and you can't say Democratic candidate or Green candidate. How do you say it if you're not a party
I'm an
person?
independent.
Independent,
Yeah.
really? Okay, all right, an independent.
Corporate-free independent.
I like that. Corporate-free candidate for lieutenant governorship of California. Gayle, thanks again for stopping in.
Thank you, Paul.
Let's get back into the music.